Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be going over the history and geography of Indonesia. There we go. It's a very long and wide country. I put my wide lens on. It doesn't quite fit my camera, so sorry if the sides are a little blurry. Just ignore that. I'll take it off after the geography portion. I'll talk about its geography. After that, we'll move on to a brief summary of Indonesian history. It's very long and complicated, so I'm going to sum it up as best as I can. And then we'll flip through this really cool book and look at some pictures of Indonesia. So let's get started on geography. First of all, this kite here is attached to this picture from the kite festival that they do in this part of the world. So just ignore this kite. It's really weirdly placed. Let me get a pencil so we can point out some of these places in Indonesia. Indonesia is the largest island archipelago country. It also has the fourth largest population in the world. It's also a Muslim majority country, which makes it the largest population of Muslims in any country in the world. As you can see, there are many, many, many islands. There are somewhere between 13,000 to 18,000 islands. It's very debatable over what constitutes an island and what doesn't. There are some 8,000 plus named islands, and about 900 or more, give or take, are permanently inhabited. And Indonesia sits on what's known as the Ring of Fire. There are three big tectonic plates pushing and pulling in this region. So as you can imagine, this area is very seismically active with earthquakes and volcanoes. There are lots of different mountain chains all throughout Indonesia. You can see right down here. There's mountains here, very mountainous, and then big mountains over here. It's mostly a nation that's very, very forested with thick tropical jungles. You can see the equator running through right here. So it's that kind of climate. And there are lots of islands and wildlife and many different cultures scattered throughout. So Indonesia borders three different countries. It borders Malaysia up here. It also borders Papua New Guinea over here. And it borders East Timor. It's kind of a weird border because it's right here and right here. East Timor has an exclave right here on the island of Timor. Let's talk about some of these islands. Let's go left to right. This big island right here is the island of Sumatra. It has lots of really big cities. I think the biggest is Medan. But another important city is Aceh, right up here, Banda Aceh. It's going to come up a lot in its history. But I'll say real quick that, like I said, Indonesia is a predominantly Muslim country, but in Aceh, it's an extremely Muslim area. They even have Sharia law, which the rest of Indonesia doesn't. It's very strictly Muslim in this corner of the country. Moving down, we have Java. Java is the most populated island in the world. So as you can imagine, it has a huge population. You can see the capital city of Jakarta. We also have Bandung, Yogyakarta. Surabaya is a very big city. It's just extremely densely populated. And yeah, there's just cities and things all over. It's not quite as forested as the other countries, islands. But we do have beautiful Bali right here. It is a big vacation, beautiful destination island. Down here in the Lesser Sunda Islands, these are the Greater Sunda Islands. The Lesser Sunda Islands, right down in here, are the Komodo Islands, which, as you can imagine, is home to the Komodo dragons. And then there is the big island of Timor as well over here, like I mentioned. East Timor's on that island. Flores was also an important island in its history in terms of spices and colonization and all that. Moving up here is the island of Borneo. Borneo has three different countries on it. This down here is Indonesia. up here is Malaysia. And right up here is Brunei, which I've already covered on my channel. It's a very fascinating country, in my opinion. The section of Borneo that's part of Indonesia is called Kalimantan. And as you can see, it's very, very jungly, very mountainous, very wild. It's actually on Borneo and parts of Sumatra that are home to orangutans, which actually there's a picture of them up here. Very, very sweet little, they're very big primates. And what's interesting is that this is how we spell orangutan in America. It's not how like any other country spells orangutan, and we even pronounce it really funny. As you can tell, in America we say orangutan. It's not that at all, but that's just how we say it in American English. I have no idea why. Let's see, moving on to Sulawesi is this cool big island over here. These islands are the Molucca Islands. It'll pop up in the history for just a moment, so I may as well mention it now. It's where the first Dutch landed in the Molucca Islands. And then over here we have Papua, also known as Irian Jaya. Papua is a very different place from the rest of Indonesia, and you'll find out why in the early section of its history. The residents of Papua are more tribal, traditional, as opposed to very modern and predominantly Muslim, like Java and all that. It's a very different culture. And let me see, did I hit all the islands that I wanted to mention? There's obviously many, many more. I believe so. I didn't mention the one other little fact is that you can see the big mountains up here. This mountain right here is Puncak Jaya, the highest point in Indonesia, but what I think the most interesting point would be Mount Krakatoa, which actually tomorrow's video is going to be all about the eruption of Krakatoa. Krakatoa is located right about here. And if you're thinking, hey, that's the water, why are you pointing at the water? You'll have to watch the video to find out. Let's move on to the history portion. Let me take off this big lens. Let's see. Oops. I couldn't fit all of Indonesia in the regular camera. Papua's left out, unfortunately, but this is a lot easier on my eyes. There's no blurriness. So anyway, Indonesia. Very interestingly, on the island of Java, there was a discovery of some Homo erectus bones, and they named him Java Man. He would have lived on Java around 2 million to 500,000 years ago, and we're going to talk about it in a video coming up really soon. Actually, I was just reading about Java Man and some of the ancient hominins found in Indonesia, but no one really knows how the Homo erectus migration occurred, but somehow they wound up down here even though they're from Africa. They really did their traveling. However, Homo sapiens would have arrived in the islands around 43,000 BCE. They were Melanesian, but around 2000 BCE or so, the Austronesians came from more up there, whereas the Melanesians came more from over there. The Austronesian culture was very dominant over the Melanesians, and they pushed them down toward here, which is why in Papua, which I can't get in frame, their culture is very different from the rest. You'll see pictures in this book of how they look and act and how they live. The Austronesians brought rice farming to the region, so when you get rice farms, you get villages. When you get villages, you get kingdoms, and in order for those kingdoms to prosper, you need to trade. And they did the majority of their trading with India and China. The trade with India was very influential in that it brought Buddhism and Hinduism to the islands. There were many different Buddhist and Hindu kingdoms that sprang up throughout Indonesia's early history. I won't mention them all because there were a lot. I'll say the biggest one, probably the biggest one. Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking of the map right now. In the 7th century CE, we have the Srivijaya kingdom. They were pretty big, and they were a Buddhist kingdom. There was another Buddhist kingdom. It was a dynasty within the kingdom. It was called the Sailendra, and they built Borobudur, which is the world's largest Buddhist temple. They completed it in 825. Much later, a Hindu kingdom called Mataram built Prambanan, which is like the equivalent to Borobudur, but Hindu. It's a very huge, large Hindu temple. I want to say it's the largest, but I'm pretty sure that's wrong. I read that once somewhere. I didn't write it down, but anyway, we'll probably find out later in this book. Another big kingdom in the 13th century, we're jumping a bit ahead, was the Majapahit kingdom. But it's around that time that the influence of Islam really started to take off. It would have started much earlier than that up here in what is now Aceh, and would have spread down throughout Indonesia. And that's when it really started to take hold. It also influenced the Buddhist and Hindu kingdoms in the area, and Islamic kingdoms came about and lasted pretty much until probably independence. I want to say there might have been some holdouts. I know there's still one. I want to say it's Buddhist kingdom in Yogyakarta, but it's the only one left. Anyway, moving on. The Portuguese were the first to arrive in 1512. It's very important to note that the Portuguese took over quite a bit of islands, but Timor was one of them. Just put a pin in that. But it was the Dutch that came to dominate these islands, and they established the Dutch East India Company in 1602. And their job was to harvest spices. Indonesia's nickname during this time and much further on was the Spice Islands. They had all different kinds of very exotic spices that weren't really found anywhere else in the world at the time. So Europe was really all about the spices in Indonesia. And, this made the Netherlands extremely, extremely rich also. So it was very important that they held on to these islands. Many different local rulers rose up against the Dutch because they were not very nice to the natives here. The biggest one would have been in Aceh up here. But in a nutshell, just note that the Dutch would have always won out during all of them. However, because of all this fighting, the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC, as it's abbreviated in Dutch, went bankrupt in 1800. So the Dutch couldn't lose this big cash cow over here, so they made it into a colony, which again, many uprisings. There was the big Java War against the Dutch, but in a nutshell, the Dutch would always win out until they didn't. In World War II, Japan invaded, and at first the Indonesians saw the Japanese as liberators to free them from the Dutch, but they very quickly realized that the Japanese were far worse than the Dutch in many different ways. So once the Japanese surrendered at the end of World War II, pretty much the next day, Indonesia declared its independence, and the first president was named Sukarno. He was a big anti-Dutch freedom fighter during the 1920s and 30s. The Japanese released him from prison, and he wound up fighting against the Japanese eventually. So he came to power, and the Netherlands pretty much said no. And they fought a war with the Indonesians until 1949, when the Netherlands were forced to recognize Indonesia's independence. So Sukarno was a very strict, very cruel leader in terms of if you disagreed, you were no longer alive. Many people lost their lives during his time. There was a coup attempt in 1965 by one of the main generals of the military. His name was Suharto. The coup failed. It sparked a huge, I want to say massacre, but it was like a government-run massacre of basically the Communist Party. And many people rose up against this. He was forced to resign, and Suharto became the president. He established what he called the New Order, which was basically the same kind of ideals that Sukarno was running, but presented differently, a more modern way. It did bolster the economy in Indonesia, but he still pretty much ran it as a one-party state, very dictatorial. He also wasn't a very nice guy in terms of history. Let's just say, like, that's the nice way of putting it, right? That's the relaxing ASMR way of putting it. The Asian financial crisis in the mid to late 1990s led to Suharto's resignation in 1997 after there were many protests and movements against him. During this time, during their switch to an actual democracy, East Timor declared independence. Now, did I say I already covered East Timor? I already covered East Timor on my channel, but remember how the Portuguese were here, right? When the Dutch came in and took over, the Portuguese retained the eastern part of Timor. So once Portugal had, Portugal had a fascist leader who was overthrown in the 70s, I want to say it was 72. So East Timor was suddenly not a colony anymore, so Indonesia invaded, and it was very, very brutal, very bloody, and the people, they were not very happy. So once the regime was gone, East Timor said, we're going to be independent, and Indonesia basically said no. And there was fighting, but East Timor would have won out, and they became their own country in 2002. So Indonesia, like I said, made a switch to democracy. It's had quite a bit of bumpy roads. There was a really horrific terrorist attack in Bali in 2002. The 2004 tsunami definitely did not help things. It wiped out many different places in Indonesia and damaged many lives. There was an armed rebellion in Aceh in 2005 against the Indonesian government. But basically, the first actual presidential election in Indonesia was held in 2004. In terms of stable democracy, it's been pretty good in Indonesia. They're definitely on the up and up. And essentially, that's where we are in history. So let's get into this book and read some cool stuff and look at some beautiful pictures. Look at this. So you're going to see lots of different ethnic backgrounds and cultures. There's hundreds in Indonesia. There's a big Buddha. That's in Borobudur. You can tell by the towers there. Some very beautiful dances as they're Tenun dancers. This is on Bali. Absolutely beautiful tropical jungle paradise. This is a floating market in South Kalimantan. Very cool. That would be neat to go to. Here's a political map of Indonesia, including where Indonesia is located in the world. This is the Grand Mosque in Aceh. Big black domes, very recognizable. Some construction in Jakarta. Jakarta is a very big, beautiful city. So, when I say there's some 13 to 18,000 islands, remember that's because a lot of the islands are like this. Like, how do you count that? It's a rock. Very beautiful, but does that constitute as an island? Is it a rock? Is it? Who knows? So, it's very debatable. This is the longest river in Indonesia. It's the Kapuas River. I believe it's on Sumatra. Pretty sure. A physical map of Indonesia. Here's a sweet elephant given a ride. Looks like to some tourists there. The aftermath of the 2004 tsunami. Absolutely very devastating. You can see that mosque again. Very easy to point out. And all of the destruction. It's really horrible, but look how beautiful Indonesia is. Isn't it lovely? And of course, beautiful beaches as well, since there's so many islands. Some of the cities. This is Medan. Very beautiful architecture. And this is it Surabaya? Yeah, Surabaya. Another busy, bustling city on Java. This is the Wasser National Park in Papua. And this is Mount Merapi, a very active volcano in Indonesia. And actually, when was it? It erupted during the, I don't want to say, because I don't want to say it wrong. I want to say it was during the Srivijaya era, and it like hindered their building and development and everything because it had a very big boom. Here's the Ring of Fire, and here's Indonesia. You can see all the volcanoes over here, and here's a depiction of the eruption of Krakatoa. That's what it looks like today. Again, watch my video tomorrow to find out what happened. This is another volcano. It is on Flores. It's called Kelimutu, and it has 3 big lakes at the top, and they're very colorful and beautiful. Here we can see monsoon season, looking uncomfortably wet. Here's a sweet orangutan that's baby. This is called a babirusa. Looks like a big old warthog. Sorry, that was my accent. Warthog. There we go. And this is a lesser mouse deer. Isn't it cute? It has a little partridge. The national bird, the Javan hawk eagle. Very intense. And this is a cassowary. It's a dinosaur, basically. Doesn't it look like one? Oh, snake warning, by the way, if you don't like snakes. This is a reticulated python. A big guy. It says they weigh around 300 pounds. And here's the Komodo dragon, the world's largest lizard. Here are some mangrove trees. This is a neat picture because you can see what they look like above the water and below the water. They grow in very like marshy, kind of brackish coastal waters, like salt water. And this is the Rafflesia, the world's largest flower, and it also is known as the corpse flower because it smells like rotting meat. Some deforestation happening there. That's very sad. And here's a proboscis monkey. They're so cute. So unfortunately the text here ruins the picture, but this is what Java Man would have looked like. He was Homo erectus. Not quite human, but sort of. Erectus meaning he used tools and built things. Some of the early kingdoms, let me get pencils. So yes, you can see Srivijaya was the biggest empire. It's in the green. The Sailendra is in the orange. The orange outline was the Mataram. And the purple outline was the Majapahit. There's the capital, Majapahit capital. There's Borobudur. And this is at Prambanan, one of the many statues there. Here are the Dutch in what is now Jakarta. They called it Batavia. The Dutch East Indies, you can see that they expanded and expanded till it's what is now today Indonesia by 1920. This is Diponegoro. He was a very famous freedom fighter during the Java War. This is Raden Ajeng Kartini, who was a feminist back in the day. She was all for women's rights. The Japanese arriving. And this is Sukarno. Here he is in the car. The protests in 1963. And some soldiers arresting some communists. It says hundreds of thousands of people were slaughtered during the anti-communist frenzy. This would be Suharto, who ruled until 1997. Some of the protests, it says in 1999, demanding free elections. This is about East Timor. You can see a photo from the fighting here and independence movement. That's their flag. Raising the flag. We'll talk about that in a minute. The national emblem, and it's now a minute later, Indonesia's flag. It says the national flag of Indonesia is called the Sangsaka Merah Putih, which means the sacred red and white. Let me know, Indonesians, if I got that right. I probably didn't. It is based on the 9-striped red and white banner of the 13th century Majapahit Empire in East Java. The flag was introduced at the Indonesian Independence Day festivities on August 17, 1945, and officially adopted 1 month later. It features 2 horizontal bands of equal size, red on the top and white on the bottom. The red represents gallantry and freedom, and the white symbolizes justice and purity. Here's the current president of Indonesia, Joko Widodo. He's the first president to not have come from like a military background. Let's see, or elite background. The People's Consultative Assembly. Isn't that a huge room? My goodness. That's a lot of people. Pride in the country there. This is Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court, Hamdan Zoelva, in 2013. This is a rally for the Indonesian Democratic Party. Here's a map of Jakarta. Look how dense it is. But it's a very beautiful city. Farming some rice. They use the Indonesian rupiah as their money. Here's a resources map, but they have so many resources you can barely see the country. They have a lot, including oil. There's some traditional oil mining. Baby getting a checkup. Unloading lumber. And talking on their cell phones. Riding on their boat. That looks like fun. So this is during a ceremony, it says, where they're hauling out all the rice to give thanks. It's Sarantone Festival. And this is really interesting. These are the Badui people, which essentially the Amish are to the United States as the Badui is to Indonesia. They don't believe in technology or modern anything. They live their life, and it's against their principles to do anything modern. Beautiful boats in Aceh. It says they paint their boats like this. So this is a Minangkabau woman. She's doing her traditional weaving. This is a Balinese man with his traditional headcloth there. And this is neat. The Toraja people have these really interesting funerals. Here they are carrying the body up to this like wooden platform where the body will be over all the festivities. And after they're buried, they put them like in this area, and then they put a wooden statue of the person in front. Cars are so loud tonight, sorry. This is a Dayak woman who practices their traditional earlobe stretching. It's a beauty sign, a beauty mark. And this is an Asmat person from Papua. So here's what I mean when I say that the people in Papua are more like tribal and traditional. They look like this. Chinese New Year celebration. And a population map. You can see just how dense Java is there. So I didn't want to mention this. It's kind of sad. Transmigrasi. It was like a, what do you call it? Like a migration movement that the Dutch implemented and Sukarno implemented, where they take people out of populated areas and move them into less populated areas to farm. It didn't work. It resulted in a lot of deforestation and poverty. Putting on some lipstick on her daughter. Worshipping at the mosque. Isn't that beautiful? Little kid said, look at this beautiful mosque. That is a lovely building. Here is Mecca, of course, because these books, whenever we have a Muslim majority country, it has to show a picture of Mecca. Here is some Catholics attending Mass. And this is Jakarta Cathedral. This is a picture of Prambanan. Does it say? Oh, it's the largest in Indonesia, but it's not the largest in the world. Got it. This, however, is the largest Buddhist temple in the world. Borobudur, they're up on the rooftop there. It's very beautiful. This is during Nyepi, a traditional holiday, Day of Silence. It's a meditation holiday. And this is for Waisak, which is a celebration of Buddha. So he's cleaning off the big Buddha statue, holding his hand. Very beautiful dancer. This is, I hope I get his name right, Pramudya Nanta Toer. He's a very famous author from Indonesia. Here's their museum, the National Museum. Another author slash journalist, Ayu Tami. And here they're playing some xylophones, some traditional music. Performing dangdut music. And a beautiful Balinese dancer. Shadow puppetry is pretty big in some parts of Indonesia. Very traditional art form of storytelling. This is a keris, I believe. It's like a weapon slash magic wand. Basically, it's part of a Hindu belief. Kind of hard to describe. Carving a statue. Here's a chess grandmaster, Utut Adianto. Here's one of those kites that was on the atlas in here. And of course, soccer's very big, like it is in most of the world. Here's a family out for the day. And these beautiful buildings. These are Toraja houses. Stunning. Very beautiful. Working hard in school. Relaxing on the beach. Here's some of the traditional clothes. It's called a kabaya, the national costume. It's a very lively looking festival there. And this guy is bull racing. And the national dish of Indonesia is nasi goreng, or fried rice. This looks amazing. I would gobble this up right away. It looks perfect. And it's a recipe for salad dressing. Some fish. And food outside at the restaurant. That's the end of our book. So that's going to be it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a very good